Welcome everybody to this fifth and final capstone installment of our semester-long pedagogy series on listening comprehension. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Abdul, for joining us. Much appreciated.
All right.
Good to see you. And at this point, it would be useful to just really quickly summarize everything that we have done, which is we began in September by talking about what listening comprehension is and why we should care, why it is important. Then we moved on in our second session to look a little bit closer at listening comprehension and to try to assess out what kind of processes listening comprehension is comprised of. And then that set us up for actual development of listening comprehension activities and ways of incorporating listening comprehension in the language classroom. Today, in this final session, we will sort of summarize and close everything up by looking at the question of assessment. How do we assess listening comprehension as such? But before we do that, I wanted to ask you all about what is the purpose of assessment as such? Why do we assess? When do we assess? And my question is not specifically about listening comprehension, but assessment in general in your courses. So why do we need to do it? Why do we do it? What do you think?
Well, one reason is to test our methodology and how it works on the students.
Mm-hmm.
For instance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It depends on, so it's which kind of assessment you do, so different assessment, so the formative assessment. So it's, for example, the formative assessment is aimed to assess what the students are doing and how they are doing and how your approach is working and how to reorganize maybe your methodology, your what you're doing in class, the activities you are doing. So it's one of the reasons for the formative assessment. Something in dynamic, something dynamic, not only just to see where the students are. So it's how they are doing in their learning.
Okay, so we have a dynamic. So we have a conception of assessment as a dynamic process, as a process that allows us to sort of check in with our students to see where they're at any given point, to see how, as Patricia is saying, how we ourselves as instructors are doing. Okay, Peter, I see that you're shaking your head in approval. Would you like to expand on it?
So yeah, but I'm no expert here. We assess to inform the students and to inform the teacher. So there's a learning curve, and the student needs to know where he is, and also the teacher needs to know where he is. So, and as my colleague said, it's either formative or summative. And yeah, I think it's one way of measuring whether any learning is going on. That's assessment. And whether it's formal or informal, basically we assess all the time as teachers. If you're talking to your students, if you're giving just simple exercises, you're assessing all the time. Even if you're not giving a grade, you're doing some sort of assessment. But the question is, what are you going to do with the assessment? What are you doing with the information you're getting out of it? Are you using it just to make a final decision or to help the teacher? But that's another discussion. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Andy, you have your hand up.
Simon, so I think we do assessment to evaluate our methodology and techniques and to see to what extent the students have achieved what the lesson expect them. And then I think we can do assessment after we do each activities for each learning goal. So we can decide what our next step is, which part still need an enforcement, or which part has been successfully achieved.
Okay, so here you're pointing at another sort of dimension of assessment, which is something that happens at the end of each step, at the end of each project, maybe each chapter. How do we classify this? How do we position this? Is it still formative? Is it more of a summative? Jose Antonio, what do you think?
Well, I came in late, so I don't know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, well, we're talking about assessment. Why do we do it? Why do we care? Why should we bother? Why is it needed, if at all?
Well, I think we need it because we need to know as instructors, we need to know if the students are getting the right ideas, and if they're learning what we are supposed to be teaching. And for the students, it is important for them to also to evaluate if they're getting the information, if they're really understanding what you are trying to bring across.
Stefani, you have your hand up?
Sure. I mean, I agree with everything everyone has said. However, I'm going to put on my little administrator hat here. There are more prosaic reasons why we assess, especially summatively. We need to assign grades. It's, you know, we exist in a universe where, you know, we need to measure progress of students. And so we need to assign grades. That's another reason why we assess. You know, we can't just ignore that.
Yeah. So it's I want to add something for the formative assessment. So at least for me, it's important to assess the progress of the students. And I have another purpose in my formative assessment is to help the students to be more aware of their learning process and to help them become more independent and more aware of what they need and how they can learn better. And so it's also with a little of self-assessment, which are their strengths, their weaknesses, and so to see how they can improve their learning, their studying method, and how they learn a grammar structure or the vocabulary. So it's very important for me to help them in this respect.
Go ahead, Chris.
I really liked Alessandro's use of the word process. I think that when we think about assessment, we can conceive of it in a way where we think of the process. We're using assessment to focus on the process. That's one perspective. And there's another perspective where we focus on the outcome. And you can stick in different things there. You could say formative and summative, but there's different ways in which conceiving of it as a process is helpful and ways in which conceiving it as an outcome is helpful. But as Peter said, both of these, you're asking the question, is learning happening? But you're asking that question in different ways and from different points of view.
Abdul, I think you also
and then I think from my point of view, the way I approach it, I divided the performances also in categories: the reading, the writing, the listening, how a student reacts when they're confronted with even the language, if they can't hear it very well or listen very well. What is their reaction and how are they to handle situations like those? And that is an ongoing process where I agree with Chris that, you know, it's a process. You can't end it. It just is a continuous, and it goes on and it rolls on and it rolls on. But students the performance is not used to quote unquote, when it comes to the grading, to punish the student for not knowing. Okay. The question is sometimes when we are in the process of assessing, you will not get a grade A if you did not do such and such and such and such. And that becomes like a process. A student may have not mastered certain techniques and they are being punished for not mastering it. So I reverse it like not to punish you, but to inform you what you need to progress and move on. and give you guidance of how you can progress.
Thank you, Abdulia. I think that folds pretty nicely under some of the things that Chris was talking about. And, you know, everything that you have mentioned, everything that you have discussed, pretty much summarizes, you know, the kind of general idea of what assessment is, which we have summarized for you in a little table, which we will share with you right now. Okay, so I hope everybody can see it. I'm just going to run through it really quickly. I mean, this is mostly what you guys were talking about. So on the one side, we can focus on the process. On the other side, we can focus more on the outcome, on the product. Either way, we are trying to see whether learning is happening. Okay, when we're focusing on the process, it is more sort of a dynamic, formative assessment. We're evaluating students over time. You know, we're interested in learning how they're doing at a specific time period. Also, we want to know whether they're kind of sort of going in the right direction, but also we want them to understand how they're doing. And by that, we also use it to find out whether we as instructors are moving our class in the direction that we charted out. For the summative assessment, where we focus on the outcome, you know, we just basically need to assign the grade, we need to quantify their performance, and you know, we need that for, as Stefan mentioned, various administrative reasons. So yeah, that pretty much sums it up. We will be giving you this handout at the end of the session. But before we do, I think it would be important to, now that we've, you know, this defined assessment, we discussed it a bit, to talk a little bit about who actually does the assessment. You know, who could be the, I don't want to say enforcer, but, you know, the facilitator of the assessment process. It is a pretty obvious question, but the answer may not be as obvious.
Let me perhaps rephrase it slightly differently. You know, is the teacher always the one who should do the assessment?
Or that, yeah.
Are there other people who could be involved in assessment?
Like who? The student?
Alessandra is going to.
I think that, so I was before, as I said before, when we talk about self-assessment, the students are the main protagonists of their assessment of their own learning. That's but for in the other, so it's the students. So the main actors in the classrooms are the teacher and the students, and I think these are the two who are are in charge of the assessment in different respects, but teachers and students.
Alessandra, do you do self-assessment in your classrooms? Do you ask students?
Yes, in some with some for some skills for the especially yes, I do some self-assessment in not at the end of every unit, but most of the times. So especially when they have, so can I do this? Not I can do. Can I? How do I feel when I have to use this structure? I'm very comfortable. I'm not there yet. Okay, or completely lost. Something like this.
Mm-hmm. Peter, I think you had your hand up here for a bit. Would you like to build on that?
Yeah, so we have indeed self-assessment and also peer assessment, where students assess each other. But the thing with peer assessment is that students need to be trained how to do this. You can't just say, assess your colleague now and give a grade if they don't know what the standards are. But indeed, yeah, peer assessment can be interesting if at least they know what they should be looking for. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Peter, is this to sort of try to put it in within the context of our discussion? With this peer assessment, which is really interesting, be more of a summative, formative, hybrid situation? Well, how would you place it? How would you apply it?
It depends on what's done with the assessment. So if the assessment of the student is used to make a final decision, then it's summative. But if it's used to inform the teaching of the student and of the teacher, then it's formative. Yeah. But I think in my understanding, most of the peer assessment that is done, students will focus on the product and not on the process. Because in order to assess the process, you need some metalinguistic knowledge, and you also need to know what has been happening in the classroom. And I don't think all of the learners are focusing on the progress of their colleagues all the time, whereas we as teachers should be doing it. So yeah, it would be more product, in my opinion.
A little more focused on the product. More.
Jose Antonio has been waiting patiently.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jose Antonio. Go ahead, please.
Well, I was just thinking in terms of the self-assessment and the peer assessment. On the self-assessment, I think as Stefan was saying before, we have to assign grades, but I don't think in the summative we cannot allow the students to assess themselves. That's my opinion. And for the peer assessment, I used it only once. Actually, I used it twice during the semester. And that is for me to make sure that they pay attention to their peers' presentations. So I tell them to make comments on and to give a certain grade to the presentation based on the grammar, and they have to tell me what are the things that they found that there were mistakes or that they did well in terms of grammar on the presentations, and based on that, give a grade to their peers. And I only do it for the presentations, for the midterm presentation and for the final presentation.
If you don't mind, Simon, I want to just briefly respond to Jose Antonio here. We don't ask students to self-assess when we're giving grades, but is that because it doesn't work, or is that because, you know, traditionally we haven't done it, it's playing to our fears? I've done a pilot with this when I taught Lit Hum, and I've actually asked students to, you know, self-assess and tell me what grade they thought they deserved. And I was surprised by, I would say, the vast majority of them, with maybe one or two exceptions, were actually not only very fair about their own learning, but actually a lot harsher than I would have been. So that was it's not a scientific, but that was my own little kind of experiment.
To make you updated, I do the same thing too. Always at the end of the semester, I ask them, okay, now tell me, assess yourself, let me know what grade you earned. They will be on target, exactly what they think. And then they know how much work they have put, but then they'll have a little thing said, but I would have preferred, I wish I had more this and this and this and that. And then based on that, it gives you an idea, like, you know, what do they need?
So, okay, this notion of self-assessment that we're discussing right now, it seems to be, you know, pretty sensible at the end of the semester, at the end of maybe a given, you know, a larger unit. Is there space to perhaps do this kind of, you know, metacognitive introspective self-assessment in a way that is more process focused? Have any of you tried that in your classes? Okay.
Run the question again.
So we are talking about self-assessment. We are talking about self-assessment as it happens at the end of semester, like in your case, Abdul, or perhaps at the end of a larger unit. What I'm wondering about is whether this kind of self-assessment can also find its place throughout the semester as more of a, you know, periodic check-in, focusing on the process rather at, you know, this final outcome, the final product.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Chris. Yes.
To answer your question, Simon, I can think of a way where maybe if you were engaging with a text or engaging with something that the students might, find sort of slightly challenging, maybe you could have like a self-assessment that's based on like perhaps the actual can-do statements, where they kind of say, okay, what was I able to do in this activity or in this text, and they can kind of check where they are, and that kind of washes back into their metacognition about what they're doing with the language at that moment, and kind of crystallizes in a sort of specific language what they're doing. So that's, it's not really you're not giving them a grade, but it's more like a checklist that's based on a thing that they're able to do, like a can-do statement.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, Pascal, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've been doing something along those lines for a long time. I was actually inspired by someone who, I don't remember her name, maybe Gudrun Lipke. I mean, she teaches German in upstate.
She's at Cornell.
Cornell, yes. And, she came a long time ago and she gave like this wonderful presentation on what to do with a student's production, either oral or written. And so what she does and what I sort of adapted is that at the end of each when a student does a composition or writes a composition, I ask them to do a self-assessment, at the end. So in several stages. So the first part is ask you. So I would like to know more about your thought processes and the places that gave you trouble. I mean, when you found yourself hesitating between, several possibilities, several tenses, or several constructions. So what things did you find difficult? So let's just try to sort of give me a sense of which particular points you found difficult. And then when they received their composition back from me with my annotations, I asked them to write a checklist, an analysis, of what things they mess up, usually, what things usually gives them trouble. That's to say, usually some people will just have word endings up so full of mistakes, or conjugations are all over the place, or word order is a major problem. So I asked them to make their own diagnosis, and then draw up a list of points that they have to work on and they have to pay attention to for the next exercise and next composition. And I thought half of the students usually ignore it. But there are some that really do it, and it's really useful. You can do the same thing with a test, so take a good look at this test, and try to identify the points that really give you trouble, and next time do better.
So this is okay. So this is applicable for composition, for written assignments. How could we frame that in the context of listening comprehension? How could we adapt it for listening? And by it, I mean this kind of, introspective, self-reflective checklist instrument. Anyone?
Yeah, the listening part is a whole lot challenging.
How so?
Because once a student is able to hear something, then they have to interpret it. And then the interpretation is usually interceded with what their cognition is in English, okay, what they understand things in English to be, versus what you hear. And in another culture where you hear certain vocabulary or certain phrases being used, now what is the context for them to understand it is the challenge in listening.
Okay, thank you, Abdul. That was pretty interesting. Anyone else would like to respond to it, or perhaps add to this?
I don't want to respond, but I do want to pick up on a word that Pascal's used over and over again, which is checklist. A checklist is an instrument that we use in order to do some assessment, whether formative or summative. Are there other instruments that we use to do listening comprehension assessment? I mean, since we've been talking about assessment, let's try to bring it back to listening comprehension. Are there other tools or instruments that we can use to do assessment? I mean, I can think of a few from back when I was grad students. So that's.
Well, you could just do like a quiz or a test. That's
Mhm.
one.
Mhm.
one
No,
way.
sure, absolutely. You know,
It would be both formative and summative, but there are perhaps other ways.
thinking more other instruments for kind of formative, following the process. I mean, whether it's self-assessment or, you know, teacher-led assessment. Can you think of other things? I mean, one of the things I was forced to do when I was a grad student, it was, you know, have regular interviews with the students, oral interviews, where, you know, they were supposed to listen to me say something and then answer. So, you know, that also gave me some indication of where they were with their listening comprehension skills. That was required. It was a required thing for every test, every quiz. It was a pain, but
Mhm.
you know, I had to do it. Go ahead.
Yes, Pascal.
Pascal.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is something you were looking for, but we could start by asking the students to think long and hard about the listening comprehension exercises that we assign and maybe identify the stumbling blocks for them. So sometimes it could be lack of context. So it could be like our fault if we have not given them the support, I mean, to just activate it basically, you know, their prior knowledge about something, or maybe it's too fast, and that's often a problem. Or have we really prepared them to recognize certain words that they've been studying? You know, because in French in particular, there are so many words that sound the same. And one of the problems too with French is that you have the impression you're listening to a continuous word. You know, you don't know where the boundaries are. So maybe if we ask them, you know, what for you, can you put your finger on the things that really give you trouble when you do a listening exercise? Maybe if we just ask them, you know, we would get some interesting answers.
So that to me hints at some sort of a journal, perhaps, where you are reflecting on your own learning process. That could be an instrument for sure. Okay, Peter, do you have any other ideas? What other things can we use to facilitate formative self-assessment?
I know in some Dutch courses, basically after the first listening round, you just, because the construct of listening consists mainly of three things: listening for main ideas, listening for details, and listening for implied meanings. These are the main three categories you should be aiming for. And then in certain textbooks, what they do is after the first listening round, just ask them, what is according to you, did you get the main idea? Talk about your colleague, did you? What is according to you the main idea? And then you can do some sort of checklist or whatever approach to see whether the main idea they got from listening is the one that you're aiming for.
Go ahead, Chris.
You know, as you're speaking, it occurs to me that one of the great benefits of formative assessments in listening is that listening is really difficult, and especially in the first few levels. And so maybe if you took an idea like Peter's, where you kind of broke it down and had listening for the main idea, listening for a specific theme, listening for a specific detail, and maybe had students break into different groups, and each group was responsible for doing one of these. You can kind of do a collective self-assessment, or each group focuses on different areas. So I think that basically what I'm saying is the tool of like a checklist, or breaking down different aspects of the listening process among different students can help to lead to more like collective understanding, or that washes back into a collective engagement with the listening activity.
I agree with that. I was also wondering, since we are talking about checklists as a very sensible instrument of self-assessment, do you think this is something that we can apply across all levels of proficiency? Would this be something applicable only to more advanced students, or just the beginner students? I mean, it's just checks after all, right? Where would it fit best?
I think that this can be applied to any levels. Like for me, I think it really helps. I was very fascinated when you mentioned about like how checklists can help us to to see where our students at. I was actually doing this to my students after their speaking practice. But now I think I'm going to try it for the listening part. So after the speaking, I asked them like, but not only on what part they think they are still, they still need to improve, but I also asked them, what part do you think you are already good at? So they can get a confidence about that. And then I know that they have learned something after the activities. And then after that, I asked them, okay, so now what do you think you can still improve on? And apparently, aside from what I note from my observation, apparently they give me like more things that I, that I didn't note. So it's interesting to see this perspective of the students. And these are the elementary level. And then with the more advanced level, I think they can be like more articulate because they have like more complicated set of goals that they need to achieve. So they give me like even more, but yeah, I think it can be applied for any levels.
Go ahead, Stefan.
Yeah, no, I agree with Angi. You can use checklist anywhere, but I've done both. I've done both diaries or journals and checklist. Once you start going higher in the curriculum, then students are able to do diaries and journal. If you try to do beginning level diaries, you get very little. And at that point, I think checklists are probably more efficient. The other advantage for checklists for me is, and it's going to sound prosaic and really self-serving, I have a limited amount of time. Checklist, especially over time, give me a visual of where students are, very quick visual. A journal, I feel obligated to read their entries, and then not only read, but respond to it, or at least to some of them. So it takes time, and is that something that I want to get into? Perhaps. I usually had less students in the advanced courses than in the elementary courses. So, it was more manageable. Very prosaic.
Well, but also very on point. Thank you, Stefan.
Yeah.
Angi, since you mentioned that you would be interested in perhaps doing a checklist for a listening comprehension activity, we happen to have a template of a checklist with us here. So let me just share it with everyone. And here it is. Hopefully everyone can see it. I know, Abdul, you may need it bigger, right?
Make it large. I don't wear glasses, man.
Okay.
You got it.
So is this big enough?
Yep, that is big enough.
Okay. So this is just a template of a self-assessment formative checklist that you can do for listening comprehension. And you will notice that it kind of, shoehorns in with this division of, before or pre and after listening activities that we discussed 2 weeks ago. So there's a, before listening session that contains a few questions that students can and should respond to reflectively. And then there's likewise an after listening with a few questions for them as well. This is, again, just, a proposition of a checklist, but we see that we're in the D 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. Those are meant for, for reapplication of the checklist, right? So it could be for, various activities or for weeks or perhaps chapters. And again, like Stefan was saying, it is meant to give students, but also you as instructors, a clear visual of where they are, where they have been, kind of the direction which they're going into, just kind of improvement. And then going back to some of the things that Angi was saying, there's also a space for a more articulate self-reflection here, right? So what is it that they can do next time to, improve, to get a better score? And this is very important because it empowers them, it motivates them, it allows them to, take ownership of their own learning process. But again, for you, also pretty valuable in the sense that, okay, here are the things that my students are struggling with, maybe I'm aware of it, maybe I'm not aware of it. Well, now I'm definitely aware of it. It's, it's all here. Okay. So with this checklist now presented, what I would like to do in the last 15 minutes of this workshop or so is to break you into pairs, where with your partner, I will ask you to go back to the activities that we all developed 2 weeks ago, before Thanksgiving, and I have them all right here. I'm gonna share this link with you. Just put it in chat. Okay, hopefully everyone, oh, oops, I did not send it to everyone. Now I did. So now everybody should have the link, okay? So for this activity, if I'm gonna pair you up with a partner, and what you will do is you will select one of these 4 activities that were developed, and it's okay if multiple groups select the same thing. And what I would like you to do is create a self-reflection checklist, a self-reflection worksheet based on one of these templates here for your students to kind of be able to self-assess their performance. Okay, so here is the first link is for, there's a lot going on, but the first link is for the listening comprehension activities. This second link that I'm pasting in right now is going to be for the self-reflection template. Okay, so take a minute to open both these links in your browsers. And as you are doing that, I will break you into stop sharing this and break you into breakout rooms. Okay, welcome back. So I hope this was a productive and a useful activity. The few minutes that we have remaining, I wanted us to share what we've developed, we put together, and I will do that by sharing the screen here. So let me just do it really quick. And maybe let's start from the top. Let's start with group 1. What is the activity that you guys selected, and how did you structure this self-reflection instrument? I think it's Alessandra, correct? And Chris and Peter. I think that was the group.
Alessandra, do you want to describe the activity?
So it's okay. Let me know. I was trying to retrieve the images to show you. Okay, that's okay. So it's I repeat, this is an activity at the advanced level, so it is a content-based class. They already have the vocabulary. So we do before a scaffolding activity. They read about these 2 paintings, and then there is the listening comprehension, and I project the 2 images. They are very, very similar, these 2 paintings. And then they have to follow the explanation of this of the 2 paintings and understand which are the differences between the 2 paintings, the things in common, and decide which is Perugino's and which is Raffaello's paintings. These are the main. Learning a lot about the colors, perspective, composition of the painting, and so on.
Mm-hmm. I'm projecting the painting. I guess you guys can see it.
Both Perugino and Raffaello are both very similar.
No,
Yeah.
we didn't see it.
You're not seeing my screen?
No, I'm sharing my screen, Chris. So let me stop sharing my screen, and then you can share yours.
Can you see it now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if I'm getting this right, Alessandra, the students will be looking at these 2 images, and there's going to be kind of it's almost like an audio guide.
Yeah.
That's talking about the 2 images. and the students will listen, and before they listen, they'll do the first part of the checklist, and after they do the second part.
Chris, do you have the checklist, or should I share it?
Yeah,
Briefly.
Why don't you pull it up, Simon?
I'll pull it up then. Okay, so this is group one. Since we've had Alessandra and Chris, Peter, would you like to explain the checklist and how you approached it for the before listening, after listening?
So before listening, we focused on whether they know the context, who the both painters are, whether they know the vocab that's going to be used, and also whether they have the skill to take notes while listening to such an explanation. And after listening, we're just checking whether they got the main points, which are basically the main differences between those two paintings, whether they're able to describe the paintings in Italian, and whether they know what the differences or the characteristics are of one of those painters. And then to improve their listening skills, we advise them next time to listen for some specific vocab words that are associated with the painting, or to focus on transition points, and also maybe try to look more closely at the painting while listening, because there's lots of visual information that they're getting just simply by looking at it.
Mm-hmm. Very good, excellent. Thank you, Peter, Chris, Patricia. As I was circling through the groups, one thing that was mentioned was that it is sometimes the case that students find these checklists a little bit infantile. They, maybe set out at the beginning of the semester completing them, and then they kind of refuse to do that, which is fine. This is just an example of an instrument that is pretty universally applicable across various proficiency levels, which doesn't necessarily mean that it will work in all contexts, right? Some students may be more responsive to checklists, some may prefer to do a written diary entry, like Stefan was explaining, and then some students may be perhaps even more responsive to a portfolio, which is something that would require restructuring of the curriculum, and we definitely don't have the time to go into right now. But this goes to say that this checklist is pretty universal. It works. It is sensible. There may be other solutions that you may just need to assess as an instructor and choose. So with 1 minute left, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And what I will share with you is sort of a summary of everything that we've talked about today. It is a handout that is a Word doc so that you can edit it. And it contains the summary of the discussion, but also a template for the checklist. If this is something that you're interested in doing, hopefully after this session, and maybe moving on through your instruction. And on that note, it is 4 o'clock on the dot. I wanted to thank you for coming to this session, and also for attending all the preceding sessions throughout the semester. We do hope that it was useful to you. It continues to be useful for you. We did appreciate your contributions and your attendance, and hope to hear from you how listening comprehension has been progressing in your own classrooms. So yeah, thank you very much.